virtual Last Supper experience that we're going to have together. So, uh, before I get started tonight, I thought I would just kind of give a shout out to what we're up to for the next few days together. As many of you know, this is traditionally known as Holy Week. So that means that we gather together for various experiences on our way to Easter Sunday. And what are those experiences like? Well, obviously tonight we mark what ends up being a kind of a closing meal that Jesus has with his immediate followers. And there's a lot that has been invested in that meal. And today I want to situate that meal in the work of Jesus in his attempt to create a community. You know, what's really happening in the meal tradition that Jesus is a part of that then becomes the way in which we continue to celebrate a shared meal together in congregations around the world. So this is a pivotal night to tend to the way in which Jesus is present for those who are following him and is present for us as well. So this is where we'll begin with a kind of a virtual Last Supper experience. I don't want it to be like communion because, you know, it's not really communion. But if you have bread and wine and maybe a candle, I've got a great loaf of bread that my son bakes as a baker. So I'm sort of in my zone. So I feel like I'm at the end of a dinner party, right? When all that's left is a glass of wine and a little bit of bread. That's sort of where we want to be. And then, of course, tomorrow evening is Good Friday. So we'll mark the final, last breath of Jesus, so to speak. And we will do that with our high school students and some music brought to us by Martin and Sam Ledoux, who put together some special music for that night. So that'll happen tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. A few more voices rather than mine. So tonight it'll be just us. But tomorrow night we'll be inviting people to join us to think about the way we kind of use the work of artists to allow us to enter into the experience of Good Friday. Then Saturday night, something special. The seminary is putting on a Easter vigil. That starts Saturday at 7, and you can join seminary students, and Sam Ledoux has had a big role in that, to kind of experience what that's like, this kind of waiting time between Good Friday and Easter dawn. And then, of course, we invite you back here 9 o'clock on Easter morning and 11 o'clock on Easter morning for a drive-in service. So that's what the weekend holds for all of us. So it's a big, obviously, it's it's a culmination of paying attention to the life and teachings of Jesus for all this time together and then finding it come to this end or to this new beginning. And that's really the wonder of this particular weekend that we share together. So make sure you shout out for each other. Good to see some of you on board. I'm glad to have you. And let's begin together, shall we? I think one of the things that I want to move us beyond a little bit tonight is sort of the image we all have in our heads of the Last Supper. And I think it's driven a little bit by that snapshot of the Last Supper that is kind of a freeze frame of the disciples gathered around Jesus. And then as we gather together week after week, pretty much the dialogue we have associated with that big supper that they shared together was simply the words of institution, the words that we've grown to be familiar with, right? The blessing of bread and the blessing of wine and the sharing. This is my body given for you. You know, we've in a sense packaged all of the vibrancy of this supper experience into like a little bit of a photo op, right? A snapshot of what happened that night and a few words that go along with it. But my guess is that in many ways, this was a dinner or a supper that was like many of the dinners and the suppers and the meal experiences that Jesus had experienced with others throughout his lifetime. These were events that bound community together, right? These were events that were filled with the energy and the synergy of when people gather together to have conversation. And in that kind of moment around a dinner table, particularly around the time of Passover that we're going to talk about in a minute, there's people, you know, asking questions and people who are confused and people who disagree. And you're arguing with this person over in this neck of the woods and something else is going on over in that neck of the woods. my guess is that this meal, prior to us capturing it in that photo setting, right, that snapshot that we have, was this um, explosion of community that happens when a diverse group of people, and the disciples were a diverse group of people. They all didn't think alike, right? Even in that night, you have people with hidden agendas, people who are doubting, people who are wondering, people who are standing, bold and strong and committed. You've got the whole array of characters in this story. They're all having this kind of probably robust conversation that binds them together into one community. And that's the setting out from which Jesus speaks those final words. I think the setting mirrors in many ways what we know of the historical Jesus, that he was one who entered into settings, and oftentimes they were dinner parties. Oftentimes they were times by the marketplace or down by the waterfront. There was a meal associated in some way with teaching or exploring the wisdom that he was trying to introduce to people based on his insights and his experiences at the time. And so Jesus used these settings in his own historical context to kind of bring kind of to enter into the, maybe you think about like the matrix of human community building. You know, how do we belong to one another? How do we belong together? What does it mean to be family, let alone the family of God? What does it mean to be religious when you can't always be religious by visiting the temple structure? And what is patriarchy all about? You know, where do I fit into the social structure? How does family life and politics and economics all fit into this? Those are the discussions that are happening at these dinner parties, right? And Jesus brings, as you all know, a kind of almost like a poetic imagination to those conversations. And that's why we've captured so many of kind of his key sayings, and we continue to hold those as central to the way in which we think about him. He entered into them with the power of metaphor and story and imagination. That's the wonder of what's going on at the meal when they gather together. I'm certain that people were leaning in and smiling and filled with like, wow, I wouldn't have seen that coming. Oh, did you hear what he just said? That sort of thing is going on. It's a little bit like, you remember the inauguration this year and all the pomp and all the circumstance. And then there were these moments when the artistic types showed up, right? When Amanda Gorman stepped to the podium and it was like, who is this person, right? And then she began to speak, and her words brought a different kind of energy to the experience, right? It wasn't the spirit of the status quo. Her language ignited the imagination in a different way. And I think Jesus functioned a little bit like that. He'd settle into these experiences with a different kind of rhetoric that would invite people to imagine their lives differently. I think it was the same case when we all noticed Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie Sanders is sitting in the corner. Everybody's dressed to the nines, and Bernie's wrapped up in I think he was in a snowboarding jacket from Burton, which is there in Vermont, right? The Burton factory. He's in a snowboarding jacket and some crazy mittens, right? And you're like, who is this guy? And he brings his own kind of different energy to the event. My guess is that's exactly what these dinner parties with Jesus were like, right? There was a different kind of energy that was settling in. It certainly mirrors what we know of the historical Jesus, that he was one without a job who longed for just bread for the day. And one of the ways in which he got his daily bread was being invited into small community gatherings where he would share some wisdom and they would share bread with him, and probably a glass of wine as well, right? That was the nature of how people thought out loud together in that community and thought about what was going on in their world. My guess is that this meal was also informed by the spirit of the season. And you probably know that this meal, whenever it took place, how it took place, we're not obviously sure, but it did happen near the Passover, in Jerusalem. And Passover was that time when everybody was talking about the history of liberation for the people of Israel. And so my guess is on that last meal, this idea of what does liberation look like? What does this freedom that God is promising us, what does it look like? And so they're having a robust conversation about whether it means that we reinstate the Davidic kingdom. And much of that longing is imposed on the person of Jesus as they see him as the new Messiah or the new king that will lead us, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, right? All of that's imposed on who they expect Jesus to be for them. What does liberation look like? Does it look like the overthrow of the government in using violence? And certainly that was a part of the day. Clearly there was violence breaking out in Jesus' time, and there would be more of it in the years ahead. So violent overthrowing of the government, that too was an option. And I'm sure it was on the table for discussion at that last meal that they shared together. For others, it was maybe rushing away, disconnecting from the culture, and maybe setting up shop, out in the wilderness somewhere, being an ascetic, just basically disconnecting from the culture and starting your new thing out on in a retreat center somewhere. Let's just get out of this mess. I'm sure that was on the table as well. My guess is that the vibrancy of community building was a place where everybody could share their perspectives and their ideas, their hopes and their longings, all mixing in with the vibrancy of probably Jesus' imagination for what kingdom might look like. That's a much different picture of the evening than the kind of photo op that all of us have frozen our conceptual framework of this event into that photo op, right? And we see a picture and a few words spoken. My guess is that the real dinner experience, the communion that we're invited to replicate, is really the vibrancy of what happened around that larger table. That meal that invited different perspectives and different ways of thinking and a feeling of camaraderie inside of that experience. And my guess is like an Italian meal. When you go out to dinner and, you've had your fill and you feel like you're connected to all the people who are there in the room around your table. And you kind of sit back at the end, right? And you've got this smile on your face after this experience. All you've got left is, a little bit of wine and whatever bread the waiter left on the table. That's all that's left. And you're thinking, what a great night this was. How I felt connected to these people at this table. How I learned a few things, gained a few more insights, thought about my life a little bit differently. That experience of being drawn into communion with others and community that are all linked to a vision or a vibrancy for the future is what was happening, I think, at that meal. And that's in my mind how we are called to fit into the meal as well. Right? It's not simply just getting a wafer and getting a cup. It's about being invited into the larger space in which that communion celebration or that bread and wine is shared. Just like the meal that night, that last meal. How do you fit into that experience, that whole experience? If you think about that as we gather together even tonight, that you are part of a community that welcomes you as kin, right? You and I, we belong together, and we know that. And these experiences that we craft together are an invitation to remember that and to feel that in our bones, that we belong to each other, even though we have different perspectives and insights, longings, hopes, dreams, problems, challenges, expectations, perspectives. We sit at one table together, and the feeling of that should be the feeling you have every time you walk into sacred commons together, wherever that is, whether it be in church, whether it be right now in this experience we're having together, whether it be in small gatherings, whether it be in intimate conversations with others, feel the weight of community first, right? Feel that in your bones. And then I think the other piece is to know that the conversation and the insights birthed out of that community, let those spark like a vision of where you place your energy and your focus and your own kind of soul's work, that it's an invitation to allow that part of you that doesn't get a lot of playtime, right, to feel fed again, to feel whole again. Like, this matters. This stuff about including other people at the table, it matters. I want to live into that more fully. So it's this invitation to be, if you will, a bigger person, a wider person. That definitely is a part of the dinner conversation that happens prior to simply sharing the cup and having a piece of bread. And then finally, know that your very body and your soul is literally united in solidarity with those who gather, right? The use of one cup. We all share this one cup that we share binds us in solidarity together. In the tradition, we break from one loaf and we're bound in solidarity together. This is the energy you want to experience when you're communing together and when you're marking this last meal of Jesus. Are you bound to the others who are with us here tonight? Whether they're here present with you or whether they even log on later in the evening, right? Wherever they are you bound to them? That's the spirit of communion. You belong at the table. You are to be present at this table. This is a meal you should feel in your bones, like the end of an Italian meal, right? You should be able to sit back and have that glass of wine and say, wow, this is where I belong. This is where I belong. Feel this meal, this sharing of bread, sharing of wine at the end of a dinner party that invites us all into family together, kin together. Let this meal, sink into your bloodstream, into your bones, into your spirit, and inform who you are, even in this virtual experience tonight, right? Your capacity for liberation, for seeking a life beyond the one you're leading now, it can be birthed in this meal that we share, right? In the commons that hold us, in the linkage to all those who gathered so long ago, to those who gather today, and those who will gather in the future. To feel yourself part of this long history of participants at this open table is just an awesome experience to have. Tonight, as I honor it, I tend to that. And I invite you to tend to that connection to those past, present, and even future. And finally, I think it links us to this kind of openness for hope. Because it's so close to Passover, and there's this real sense of how is this future going to unfold? And then given the experiences of the days ahead, we are taken in a direction that really is hard to swallow, right? The violence that is present for us on Good Friday, and then something still full of life on the other side of that. So we are also confronted with the challenges of loss and letting go and death and end in this meal that we share. We know that's coming. And at the same time, we don't forget the way this community felt when we were here. And so those words, keep doing this, will you? In remembrance of me. Keep remembering this moment and this experience that we have. Keep grounded in this commons that we share that is ritualized in bread and wine. So tonight, my friends, I raise a glass to you. and hopefully you got a glass of wine too, or not. You can have an imaginary glass of wine to know that at this present time, right, all that gather around the world for a night like this, we are kin, we are connected, we are bound not only to one another, but to the spirit of this living Christ, right, that aches its way all the way back in time and is hope for the future as well. Bread broken, wine shared. May this virtual moment together give you focus and help you live in solidarity with all that is going to happen in the next couple of days, all the way through Easter morn. All right, I'm into that. All right, to end, I am going to have a piece of bread. Just as a reminder, I had to dip it in olive oil because not a lot of moisture there. Hopefully tonight was just a way to, for you to pause and dip into not just the ritual that we mimic on a Sunday morning over and over again, but I wanted you to just get some a flavor for the vibrancy of conversation and community out from which the ritual is birthed, right? Because it's not just about replicating the ritual. It's about rebirthing that community connection piece, right? Communion with one another, communion with all that is beautiful and wondrous and mysterious and hope-filled. That's communion. That's what we celebrate with wine and bread tonight and each week together. All right, all. Go in peace, and we'll see you tomorrow night.